Hello. So, a couple of weeks ago, Team Wise organised a webinar on Zoom with 100 other interpreters to discuss the impact of coronavirus and this whole crazy situation on our profession. And so, I decided to write a speech summarising everything that had been said so that I could share it with my interpreting students at La Laguna. And then I thought, well, why not share it with Wise? And so here we go. It's a sim speech, lasts about 15 minutes. Last week, I was lucky to be part of a group of 100 interpreters who came together to talk about the effects of the coronavirus pandemic on our profession and a lot about RSI, or remote simultaneous interpreting. It was organised by Joe Burbidge and Jose Sentiment, who I'm sure you've heard of. They are the masterminds behind the WISE workshops, which are week-long practice sessions held every summer in Brussels and Valencia, I'm sure you know. Now, some of the interpreters who took part in this meeting were very experienced. Some were less experienced. Some had worked with RSI before, and others had never even seen them before, the different platforms. But in general, there were really a lot of interesting points made, and a lot of things came up that I hadn't even considered before. And apart from the content of the meeting itself, it was actually a really great opportunity to virtually meet other interpreters from 4 different continents. And it also involved people speaking lots of different languages, so interpretation was offered. And this meant that it was also a great opportunity to experience the interpretation features of Zoom from a client's perspective, as well as listening to the work of experienced interpreters, which is always a treat. Now, the first obvious conclusion that was drawn was that right now, if we want to work as interpreters, just like everyone else, we need to do it online. Now, RSI has been around for some years now, and there's already a lot of technology out there. There's a lot of different platforms, but up to now, very few organizations have actually used it. And now we're in a position where we have no choice. And so we're finally facing up to the reality of what implications this entails for our profession. And that's what I'd like to look at in this speech. So first, the client relationship. Now, the fact is that lots of companies don't even know what remote interpreting is. They're totally lost, as are a lot of us as well. And so they actually need advice and guidance. And the consensus was that what we should be doing is reaching out to our direct clients and assuring them that we know they're in a tricky position, and telling them that we're more than willing to help them to find out how we can help them to meet their needs. But of course, in order to do that, first we need to know what solutions are out there. Now, at the same time, our work on these platforms is exposed to even more risk, really, of being undervalued. When we work remotely through these platforms, interpreters are even more invisible than they would be in the booth, because now delegates can't even glance back behind them to see who's talking into their ear. We're completely invisible. And what this potentially means is that we're at risk of turning into a commodity, and that our work will be less valued. And inevitably, this will result in negotiations with our rates. Now, of course, companies will be trying to cut costs anyway, because we're facing really tough financial times right now. And what seems to be happening already is that there's a tendency to charge remote interpreting by the hour and even by the minute in some cases. And that's in contrast to the traditional tariffs, which are by the day or by half day. The reality is that there's no such thing as a 1 hour interpreting event. It always ends up overrunning to at least 1 hour and 20 minutes. And that's too long for one interpreter to work on their own. Now, in fact, some of the people at this meeting argued that even 30 minutes was too long to be working alone in an RSI situation. So far in our profession, unfair competition has been kept at bay because of the system put in place by EYAWKANDA of establishing a professional residence. Yeah. Um, but suddenly, this whole system is out of the window because it no longer matters where people actually are located physically. We don't need to fly anywhere or pay for a hotel anywhere. So, what's happened now is that we're all essentially competing with each other all over the world. And of course, interpreters who are used to charging Swiss rates are going to really struggle to compete with interpreters that are charging the standard rates in Madrid or wherever. Now, there was some talk at this meeting of trying to establish a standard kind of European rate or even a standard international rate, but there was a lot of concern about the realistic implications of this because people have very different living costs if they live in Geneva compared to if they live in Jaén, for example. Okay. Um, and there's also the additional preparation time that has to be taken into account. Um, we have to research all of these platforms. We have to spend time educating our clients about them. And we're also facing a lot of extra costs ourselves. We need to invest in hardware such as reliable USB headsets, good quality microphones, sound cards, cable connections for reliable Wi Fi, and on top of all that, the registration fees for these software platforms themselves. And it's vital that we do ensure that our technology is up to speed because if there are any technological disruptions during an interpretation, then clients are going to be very quick to point the finger at the interpreter, even if actually it has nothing to do with the technology on our end. Because actually, we have absolutely no control over what headset meeting delegates choose to buy. Now, that said, their decisions can actually have a huge impact on the quality of our work. And in extreme circumstances, it can even be a safety issue. There was some concern about acoustic shock. So, this is when you have a very loud noise come at you suddenly in your ear, which can actually be very harmful. And we have to be aware of these risks because we rely on our ears, and this is something that's completely beyond our control. Now, there was some mention of specific devices that can help to protect this. Um, we need to do more research there. And then there's also the issue of security. How can we really be sure that software providers like Zoom and Interpretify and all of these people, how can we know that they're not hacking into our computers and stealing our data? And can we really guarantee our clients confidentiality of the meeting content if that's not something that the platform that we're using can offer in their package? And then finally, we have all of the practical differences for the day-to-day work of interpreters, because the reality is that working online represents a much greater cognitive load than working in the booth. And so it's much more tiring at the end of the day. There's a lot more visual input. There are chat boxes that you have to use. There are different screens. There are buttons that you have to click on. And sometimes these things don't even work properly, which can be a real distraction. For example, if you're trying to contact your booth partner through a chat box and there's a tiny delay in those messages arriving, well, this can be absolutely crucial when you're trying to help your partner with writing down names and numbers, etc. And actually, these chat boxes, they're usually the only connection that we have with our booth partner. On most of these platforms, you can't see or even talk to each other. And this, of course, has effects on our work, on the quality of work, but it also has quite a negative effect on our morale because there's absolutely none of the camaraderie of working with another person and having a laugh and pulling a funny face, etc. And then also, on top of that, working from home, you have all the other distractions of noisy neighbours and barking dogs, etc., etc. So those are all the potential implications of RSI and the risks to our profession. But what was the advice that came out of this meeting? Well, the first thing was that in order to make sure that our needs are being met, we first need to very clearly establish what these needs are. And there were four main things that were pointed out. First, we need to be able to hear very well and hear safely. so eliminating the risk of acoustic shock. We need to be able to see the speaker and the presentation if there is one, and we need to be able to see them well. We need to be able to interact with our booth partner efficiently, and we need to minimize our own liability for any of the problems that could come up because of technology or internet connection, etc. Now, ideally, also, we should be able to listen to different incoming channels so that we're able to take relay, also just in case anything goes wrong with the channel that we're listening to. Now, these criteria should determine whether or not we accept an RSI event. And if these criteria aren't met, then the message was that we shouldn't accept the assignment. Now, in order to be able to assess whether or not these needs are being met, then of course it comes back to the problem that we need to have a good knowledge of the platforms that are out there and what they can offer us. And the general consensus was that this is something that we should be helping each other with. We should talk to colleagues to find out what's worked for them. We should even try to practice with each other in mock conferences to have a go and see how the tools work. Now, one person even suggested starting up a not-for-profit interpreter platform where we can post reviews and ask questions, which is a great idea. So hopefully someone's already working on that. Now, as for the platforms themselves, Interpretify, VoiceBoxer were mentioned, but Zoom is a good enough platform for certain types of settings. But if it gets a little bit more complex and if you need relay, that's something that Zoom can't offer. So then you'll need to look at one of these more expensive packages. There was one suggestion that perhaps one day there will exist a type of package of interpreting hours that can be bought at a discounted rate and maybe shared between interpreters. Who knows what they'll come up with. Whatever platform we use, though, there's inevitably going to be a lot of extra work up front. So you have to get to know how it works, and you have to help your client to get to know how it works, and you have to answer all of their questions and ensure, or do your best to ensure, that they are meeting the technical requirements just like we are. And so there was a feeling that this extra work, on top of the extra stress and that's involved with working through these platforms, well, this should be charged as maybe a 10 to 20% increase on our normal rates, or perhaps more specifically outlined as a preparation fee. Now, this could be a good weapon against this growing tendency towards charging hourly rates. And instead, we should look at maybe charging a package, which includes the preparation time, glossary building, setting up the platform, etc., etc. And in this way, our pricing will be much more transparent. And so clients will be able to see exactly what they're getting for their money. And it also might force us to realize how much we actually put into events as well, because interpreters are too often guilty of undervaluing ourselves. And ultimately, we must remember that the client is saving money by having this meeting online. They're not paying any travel costs, they're not paying for biscuits and expensive coffee breaks, they don't have to rent the booths. And this is even more reason why we shouldn't accept a reduction in our rates. And we should never accept hourly work. Now, to end on a positive, I would just like to say that I personally believe and hope that this could represent an opportunity for us. Ultimately, it will depend on our capacity for change. And it was only a matter of time before RSI became the norm. So perhaps this situation is the push that this sector was waiting for. And it will lead to some excellent new technology and perhaps more work for everyone. The technology will get better and better, and as it does so, it will become more affordable. And that may mean that more and more companies will hear about it and may consider interpretation for their events where in the past they may have just made do. Ultimately, it's too early to tell, but one thing is for certain. If we want to avoid the race to the bottom that we witness with the translation industry, then more than ever before, now is the time to maintain solidarity with our colleagues around the world. Thank you.